Hey, everybody, I don't know about you, but as you've watched out over the world, the war in Russia and Ukraine is not just isolated to Eastern Europe. It's spread all over the world, and you can see it in market instabilities. You can see it here. People who do not think that that war is affecting you, all you got to do is look at gas prices. You look at your food prices. You see the global change that has happened. But you know something that's also affected investments as well. And I've said all along, legacy precious metals is your navigator. They're the ones that see you through to get to the next level. The good news about this is even with market volatility, market instability, you've got options. And gold prices are rising as investors turn to gold. And gold presents a hedge against this inflation and that protects you against the weakening dollar, which we are seeing. Legacy Precious Metals is the only company I trust to deal with gold and silver and the other precious metals. You need this investment. You need this as part of your portfolio to keep you buffered from what we're seeing in the world, war and volatility in the market. This is where you need to be. Call Legacy Precious Metals today. Be proactive about this. Get on board with it. Call them at 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903, or you can download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com. legacypminvestments.com, your navigator in a volatile world of investments.
Do you want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it?
The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun.
Hey everybody, I got a question for you. How many of you know that there's an agency that technically has control over mortgages, credit cards, loans, how you can get money, how the banks or these institutions cannot give you money, and at the end of the day has no absolute oversight by Congress? This was an agency set up by the federal government that has every impact into your life, but yet Congress does not have a control over it, either through by how it gets its money or by the processes of oversight from Congress. Well, that's the CFPB. Today on the show, John Berlau is going to be with it to talk about that. We're going to get to that here in just a few minutes for the discussion, because the Supreme Court has decided to pick up this case. I'm hopeful that this case will begin a dismantling of the CFPB at most, and hopefully a very much of a restructuring of the CFPB, because this is an agency that gets into every part of your life. It affects everything that you do financially, but yet has no real oversight in it. Came out of the Obama-Biden administration. This is Elizabeth Warren baby as he looks at it. So it's going to be a great conversation today. But I was just thinking, too, as we've been looking over the last few days and seeing the courts in itself. Let me just say a statement here for a second. This court is seemingly, I know it's taken a lot of heat, and we've talked about it here on the podcast, but this court is bringing, I believe, back some equilibrium to the executive branch and the Congress and the legislative branch, along with others. So let's make sure that we're paying attention to these kind of cases, because when these kind of cases come up, they affect you. John, good to have you back on the show. I mean, lots going on. We're going to get to the CFPB stuff here in just a minute. But give me just sort of an impression. I mean, we've been talking about markets. We've been talking about, over time when you've been with us before, that business issues and things going on in our financial system. Where do you see us right now, John? There's a lot of folks out there that are still looking at the Fed. They're looking at the, now unfortunately, fortunately, however you want to look at it, getting into a political season. Where are you looking at it right now?
I look at the market. I never underestimate the initiative and entrepreneurship and innovation of the American people, no matter what politicians do to them. As my colleague Wayne Cruz says at CEI, all politicians, you don't need a stimulus. All you need is just to remove the rocks that are keeping the garden from growing. And there are a lot of rocks, but people find ways to get around them. And now with divided government, with the Republican House, you have at least somewhat of a break, and hopefully the courts, the Trump-appointed judges, and maybe others who will see who will take seriously the Constitution, will also give American entrepreneurs a break, like in this case, where they hopefully will place the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the monstrosity created by Dodd-Frank, to escape the accountability of both the president and Congress under some constitutional constraints.
Yeah, John, and I think let's do something. And I thought about this as you were talking there because, it's been around for a while now. People, and it was, Elizabeth Warren's baby, brought up under, Obama, Biden the first time. Completely, and we can get into a lot of it, but I want people to understand that this is more than just a court case. Because frankly, we have the attention span many times, of folks that we will pay attention to what we need to pay attention to. This is something that's been out there for a while. People have, is either faded in the distance. It's been discussed by us in Washington for a long time. Go back for just a second, if you would. Give us sort of the foundations of what this is, what it may be intended to be, what it actually is, and how everybody listening to this podcast is affected by the CFPB.
Okay. Well, everybody is affected. Everybody who basically gets out a mortgage, the lack of competition. We had actually one of our co-plaintiffs in a lawsuit, people that we were representing in a lawsuit against the CFPB long time back, that raised some of the same grounds that the Supreme Court is now hearing. So the community bank, which had not had a default in decades because they knew everyone, it was the State National Bank of Big Spring, Texas, said that they couldn't make mortgages because of the weight of the red tape. And this is basically, Elizabeth Warren said that you basically should regulate loan products like toasters, that the disclosure was not enough. You would need to, if a loan is proved to be faulty, never mind how, if it's the way people use it, a type of loan, the government needed to ban it, and you needed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, just like the Consumer Product Safety Commission. I think about her analogy, especially now that the Biden administration wants to ban gas stoves for their own good. So it's not really good to have the government interfering in too much in the market for kitchen appliances or for mortgages. But also, one of the things that Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, when they were making Dodd-Frank, was they put in an unaccountable head of this agency that could not be removed by the president except for malfeasance. So it was not an independent board like, say, the Securities and Exchange Commission, Federal Communications Board, where you had people of both parties. It was like a cabinet secretary, but it was one that served a fixed 6-year term that could potentially outlast the one of the presidential administration. And on top of that, it was not accountable to Congress either, because it did not get its appropriations from Congress. It got its appropriations from the Federal Reserve, the money the Federal Reserve makes from selling dollars. And this agency with no accountability would have just incredible reach, not only over consumers that get mortgages, but just for any small business that extends credit, including, like, say, an orthodontist that spreads out payments because people can't pay for their kids' braces all at once, or a butcher who may do that. You've got plans, with buy now, pay later. The CFPB has jurisdiction over all of that, and yet no accountability. Somewhat the accountability was fixed in a court case when they ruled that the president does have removal power. And of course, Biden, even though he's now complaining about that the CFPB should be independent, was fired, as he had the right to do. President Trump's appointee on the first day in office, and appointed his an acting, and then got confirmed Rohit Chopra, who's the head of it now. And that's something the next Republican administration is going to do. But as long as they are shielded from congressional accountability, they lack, with the appropriations, they lack that pillar of accountability that so many other agencies have. And the Congress can't use its power of the purse strings to exercise and make them more in line with the voters' wishes. Well,
and John, you just brought up something I've seen a trend in D.C., and this one is the most egregious example. And again, it's we can look back on it in the past tense and say, how could this have happened? But really, even in the present tense, you got to say, how could this have ever happened? How could you have thought something was so egregious in the marketplace, so to speak, that you would remove or begin? Remember, in the beginnings, basically, you set up an independent agency, forced its funding through the Fed, which the Fed Reserve didn't want to fund to start with. They have griped about this from the start. but made it completely independent from anything focused in government, but yet put it over. I mean, this screams, the all the way back to the Tea Party, the British Tea Party. I mean, we have no say in what this organization does. And that one court case you talked about, it made some difference, but it's still the independence of this agency and how it's funded is extremely important.
Yes, and it's independent. I mean, the independence is kind of a show too, because is the head of the CFPB, who Biden appointed and was confirmed by the Dem Senate. I mean, shows up at the White House all the time and talks about coordinated efforts, like say on junk fees, like on these price controls on late fee credit cards, which would, raise the price of, those who pay on time and everyone else. So they're always talking about coordinating with Biden, with the CFPB and the FTC on that. So the agencies are not really, they're loyal to the administrative state, and if they like a party in power, yet what the synonym for, it's really more unaccountability than even independence, because they're not accountable to Congress and the people's wishes.
Yeah, so we break this down, folks. If you're listening today with John and Berlau and I talking about this, let me just break this very, very clear. It goes down to this. This is what many of us fought against. It's why President Trump appointed Mulvaney. There were several others that basically for at least about 4 years we saw a stoppage of CFPB for the most part. It was still there, but because we were wrestling with such a unique setup of how this agency was set up to start with, it was very difficult to get answers. I mean, they built a multi-million-dollar building in Washington D.C. with a waterfall in the front. I mean, this is.
Yes, 3 times the cost of other Washington buildings. And when your colleague at the time, who's still in Congress, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, asked Richard Cordray about it, he gave the answer like, why does this concern you? And something like that, which is so arrogant. You're only a member of Congress. You don't fund me, is basically what he's saying.
Yeah, well, and it makes it up, John. I mean, just that kind of arrogance. Could you have imagined? I mean, and let's put this in perspective for people. Could you imagine the Secretary Austin from the Defense Department, Secretary of Defense, coming to the Hill and saying, look, we get our money from everywhere else. We don't really give a flip about you. That's sort of really what this agency is sort of set up as. And I don't think people understand that some of this stuff that you're seeing in your credit markets, your credit scores, your credit card issues, these kind of things are all coming from an agency in which your congressman, your senator have frankly no direct impact into.
Yes. And I mean, community banks and credit unions, the Credit Union National Association have said the cost for credit unions, like in 4 years after the CFPB, went from like $4 billion to $7 billion what credit unions have to pay. The Independent Community Bankers of America have talked about that and talked about how, a lot of community banks can't issue mortgages anymore because of the cost of CFPB rules. There was one particular outrage where a judge, a federal judge reined them in, but may be overturned, where the CFPB went after a lender in the Chicago area. Now, Chicago just threw out its mayor, the residents of Chicago, the mostly Democrat, mostly African American, because of crime. Yet the CFPB charged this lender with discrimination because of comments one of the principals was making on a radio show like yours about crime in Chicago. They made the charge that talking about crime in Chicago would create an unwelcome atmosphere for African Americans without even showing an applicant who had been discriminated against, was creating a disparate impact. So, I mean, it's just talking about crime. I mean, First Amendment issues, so many things, where this is out of bounds, to put it mildly. And that's why you need, that's what happens with an agency with, no accountability to Congress like this. It has such a wide range.
Exactly. I mean, when you get into this too, you're also going into, even down, because all of this is slowing down. You get into the industrial loan groups, where small $1,000, $2,000 loans. I mean, and again, that people need, otherwise they're going to turn to the streets. I mean, there's a real huge issue here, as we look at, but all of this is affected by CFPB. John, you just hit on something I want to, if you don't mind, I want to delve into a little bit more. To me, this equity, ESG stuff, the issues that government agencies are forcing upon, the Biden administration is forcing upon the stock market, the way businesses conduct themselves in contract, getting these social impacts, these equity issues, all these things coming into it. I think this snuck up on a lot of people. It was disguised in these fairness kind of clothing. But these are the kind of things in which we are moving more and more, especially under this administration, to a basically a government controlled or a heavily government influenced private business sector.
I think very much so, and all the more reason for Congress, for the DEI edicts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, so-called in the agencies, is for Congress to exercise their power of the purse strings in the appropriations fight, which they can do with agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, others. But unfortunately, they can't do that with the CFPB as long as they don't control the purse strings there. So that's why they need it with all of these things, and it shows that it's the agencies are not really independent if this is pushing all of these. They'll work with an administration they like, so or that they're in ideological sympathy with, and that's why you need the congressional check.
Yep. Well, that brings us to the case. That has now been picked up to be heard next cycle with the Supreme Court. Again, for those out there hoping this will be heard now and be done by June, it'll probably be next June before we actually see it.
I believe there's a chance it could be heard now. It could be heard late in the session. That's uncertain.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Known to be heard next session, but we know possibility this session. That would be outstanding if we could, because this has drug on for almost going on 12 years now. This has been a long process, drawn out. Discuss the case for a minute. We've mentioned the reasoning why behind CFPB and sort of what you're sensing from the what we've seen from the court in, say, the student loan case. We've seen it in the Department of Energy case, where this just automatic deferral to executive power is not there anymore. It seems, and I think that would give, for those of us who are concerned about overreach and a lot of things, a lot of hope that maybe we're going to see this begin to be continued roll back on the major questions doctrine, those kind of things like that.
Yes. Well, this case, it's interesting. It began as a challenge. You had mentioned some of the smaller loans, like some of the lenders who make that. I think the Community Financial Services Association were challenging a rule from the Obama administration, as far as that was partially repealed in the Trump administration, but partially because it was put in the courts, was still going through court review. And they ruled at the time that the Fifth Circuit, and which covers Texas, Louisiana, and which has challenged a lot of the deferral to executive agencies when they twist what Congress said, or lack of accountability, had said that this rule was invalid because of the structure of the CFPB, and it doesn't get appropriations from Congress. And that's actually voided the rule, which is very important, because when rules are made, just like when there's jury tampering or other thing process, and somebody doesn't get a fair trial, the courts should, as the court did in this case, rule that that regulations enacted in an unconstitutionally structured agency should have to go back to the drawing board. And it did with this rule and potentially other rules that were challenged. Because of that, rather than take its chance in the Fifth Circuit, the Biden administration actually asked the Supreme Court to review this. So the Fifth Circuit put Americans who believe in the constitutional system in a good position. So I think what could happen. The question is, I think the Biden administration is going to try to get the Supreme Court, expect them to do all of these horror stories about, if you don't have if the CFPB somehow got funding from Congress and had to answer to politicians, there would be all this fraud. Never mind. That there are just so many other agencies that answer to Congress, and somehow they do punish fraud, although in the case of FTX, sometimes they don't go after it fast enough, but that's not an issue. But just scare stories. Also, the other things are, some issues about, would this void the rule? Would this void the rules? All the rules for the CFPB or just some of that. And I think they're looking for like a split among the Biden administration is looking for a split among the conservative justice about how much of what the CFPB did previously go out the window, and also look for when it does get, what the results of this case, if it does the way that where funding is necessary, where Congress, that is when Congress, to sort of reauthorize the agency or to vote for funding should have at the very least a couple conditions, like the Chicago case, the late fee price controls that would raise things for everyone. I mean, we're putting that together and it gets the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the most outrageous actions of the CFPB and what needs to be repealed there, what we need to get the agency to repeal before it gets a penny.
Yeah, no, I think you're dead on. The question comes, and I'm wondering if, beyond the funding issue, which has been one of the main question points in this legal case, the Supreme Court can also widen its view. And I think this could be an interesting time in light of some of the decisions recently we saw in last term, and hopefully we're going to see in this term. To go back to the very essence of, did Congress, this to me goes back to almost to, the Marbury-Madison kind of thing. Did Congress make a law that was inherently unconstitutional?
I think, well, yes, as far as the courts already ruled that a single director heading an agency must be removable by the president. Now, this was before Justice Barrett was on the court and Roberts was, so it kind of did this, quote unquote fix where it said, from now on, the director will be removable by the president without revisiting past actions under this structure. And that's going to be the issue, as far as I think you might see a split with Justice Roberts and maybe another one with some of the others about, do we just say this is from now on, or do we revisit the previous actions there? But definitely it would say that, despite what Congress can't shield itself from accountability. I mean, we make the point, like with regulations in general, that it offers that Congress lacks both the authority and the responsibility, because sometimes they say, yeah, we made this law, but we didn't interpret it. That was the regulatory agencies. What CEI has advocated for a long time is that Congress should be able to have to approve, like in the REINS Act, at least major regulations, if not every regulation, so that voters would have voters would have accountability over these rules and know who to blame when they go through, and give Congress that responsibility.
Well, as the primary sponsor of the REINS Act for 8 years in Congress, I'm in full agreement of that. And because that was one, and if for people who don't know what the REINS Act is, it basically just what John said. It gives Congress the ability on these multi-billion-dollar large regulatory packages are put together in these agencies, such as coal, brick, auto emissions, water, those kinds. That Congress actually has to step up and do its job, and that is not just pawn it off to agencies and then say, well, we can't do anything about it. Again, this CFPB though just strikes at the heart of all of us though that cannot believe that there was a Congress, that there was a law put in place that actually set up an agency that directly affected all of Americans, and did so outside the purview of anything Congress can do about it. And I think just the heart of it, not just that you can remove a director, but the fact that it's not funded, the way it's funded, how it's funded, it just reeks of this needs to change.
It really does. It came about when the Dems were controlling, Obama was in power, President Obama was in power, and the Dems were controlling both branches of Congress, but it's just been so hard to reverse. There was in the Trump administration, both in Congress and through his power of the regulatory agency, there were some, at least, some pushbacks that made things, a little easier, lifted some of the red tape for the American people. But now, as the Wall Street Journal said a couple of days ago, there's just been a deluge of more red tape from the Biden administration. But the courts are still there, and hopefully they will, adhere to the Constitution and use the power that they have to rein rein in these runaway agencies like the CFPB.
No, exactly. And if it wasn't for like Mulvaney and the other Trump appointees, it's sad when you have to put an appointee to basically go in and just stop doing anything in an agency for an agency to quit, harming the American people. And the Biden administration has shown no desire to not harm American people in this regard, because they have this, again, it is, they don't like private contracts. They don't like the free market system. And Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and many others, going back to Dodd-Frank and everything else, has just been hammering away at that for a long time. So, John, from a perspective going forward, we can look at it possibly this year, but definitely next term. In the meantime, we'll hopefully see things like the student loan program be shown to be unconstitutional, as I believe it is. We saw this last year. I hope that Roberts doesn't try to continue to keep this court in what I call a Band-Aid mode. We saw that. You made a little reference to it a little bit earlier with that previous ruling. The concern I have with Roberts is, and he's a conservative jurist. I get it on most business stuff, but when it comes to the big questions, he seems to be more of a let's see if we can make this bad meal a little bit better by adding a milkshake to it or something, because some of it just needs to be scrapped, and he seems to be more of one to put a Band-Aid on.
He thinks he's concerned about the legitimacy of the court, but so he thinks incremental steps don't overturn precedents all at one time. But when there's a bad precedent, wrongly decided and out of sync with the Constitution, it is legitimate for the court to overturn it, and it's certainly not stopping the attacks in the court when they go Roberts' way. That doesn't. Certainly not attacking the leftist attack. So I don't think sometimes you have to, it's the best thing in the long run just to rip the Band-Aid off. To use another Band-Aid analogy.
Oh, yeah. I wish that Roberts would focus more on the law. What does the law say? What does Congress rules? What are those kind of things? Again, I'm being a little critical this morning. I get it, but I mean, Roberts I don't think would have ever set up judicial review. I mean, you go back to this, from these big picture perspectives on how this actually works. But John, we're going to keep up with this. Thanks for your insight. People need to be aware that this is affecting their credit cards, their home mortgages, their car loans. And when we got inflation like it is, we got a Fed that's raising rates. We got all kinds of things going on. These become more and more pocketbook issues for everyday Americans. John, thanks for joining me today. Okay.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug. CEI.org is our website.
Outstanding. Go to them. You can find out all kinds of information. CEI.org. They got lots of stuff. Great place to learn. I go there a lot to see what is being written. John's one of their leaders. That's why he's on this podcast a lot. We appreciate him being a part. Go to there and find out. Also go to the DougCollinsPodcast.com. You can leave me an email if you have any more questions that we maybe could bring up in future episodes. Glad to have you with us today. We'll see you next time on the Doug Collins Podcast.
Thanks so much, Doug. It's always a pleasure.
Hey folks, MyPillow is excited to bring to you their biggest bedding sale ever. For a limited time, you're going to get the Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $29.98, a set of pillowcases for only $9.98, and rejuvenate your bed with a MyPillow mattress topper for as low as $99.99. $99.99. Get a mattress pillow topper. Look, they come in all sizes. They got all kinds of stuff. Blankets. They've got duvets. They got quilts. They got comforters. They got body pillows. They got bolster pillows. They got all at big discounts. And also, they're extending their money-back guarantee for Christmas until March 1, 2023, making them the perfect gift for your friends, your family, and for everyone you know. Folks, and just from a personal note here, I have the Giza Dream Sheets. They're on my bed right now. I slept on them last night. Some of the best sheets that we and Lisa and I have ever owned. They are worth, at this price, they're a steal. My wife and I have bought bed sheets, linens at much higher cost. It's supposedly much higher quality. These from MyPillow are at the highest of quality, and at a price like this, you can't beat it. So go now to MyPillow.com, use promo code Collins, COLLINS, or call 1-800-986-3994, and you'll get huge discounts on all the MyPillow bedding products, including the Giza Dream bed sheets for as low as $29.98, and get all your shopping done while qualities last. And remember, put in that promo code Collins for these discounts.